Good morning, all of you. Today, we are going to talk about Robert Frost. Robert Frost was born on 26th March 1874 in San Francisco, California. He was the most popular American poet of the 20th century. Most Americans recognize his name, the titles of and lines from his best-known poems, and even his face and the sound of his voice. Given his immense popularity, it is a remarkable testimony to the range and depth of his achievement that he is also considered by those qualified to judge to be one of the greatest, if not the very greatest, of modern American poets. He was awarded the Distinguished Pulitzer Prize 4 times. His father was a journalist and local politician, died when Frost was 11 years old. His Scottish mother resumed her career as a school teacher to support her family. The family lived in Lawrence, Massachusetts, with Frost's paternal grandfather. In 1892, Frost graduated from a high school, Dartmouth, and attended Dartmouth College for a few months. Over the next 10 years, he held a number of jobs. He worked as a cobbler, farmer, teacher at Pinkerton Academy and the State Normal School in Plymouth. In 1894, the New York Independent published his poem, the first poem, My Butterfly, and he had 5 poems privately printed. Frost worked as a teacher and continued to write and publish his poems in magazines. From 1897 to 1899, he studied at Harvard but left without receiving a degree. In 1895, he married a former schoolmate and co-valedictorian, Eleanor White. They had 6 children. He married Eleanor on December 19, and Eliot, their first child, was born on September 29, 1896. Eliot's death from cholera in July of 1900 was the first of many family tragedies that Frost would endure. Between 1899 and 1907, Eleanor and Robert had 5 more children. Another son, Carol, and 4 daughters, the last of whom lived only for 3 days. Frost's mother also died in 1900 of cancer. Now, we can say that these were the dark years of his life. But there was another tragedy when his grandfather, William Prescott Frost Sr., he died and in 1901, and he left his grandson a yearly annuity of $500, a substantial amount at that time, and the use of his farm in Derry, New Hampshire, for a period of 10 years, after which Robert would become its owner. Despite his popular image as a farmer poet, those 10 years were the only period of Frost's life in which he seriously worked at farming, and in the last 5 of them, he had also found it financially necessary to teach school. He sold the farm in 1911 when it became his, and with the proceeds, he moved his family to England in August 1912, hoping to find there the literary success that had eluded him in his own country. There, he published his first collection of poems, A Boy's Will, followed by North of Boston, which gained international recognition or reputation. Frost met numerous literary figures, including Ezra Pound, Hilda Doolittle, and William Butler Yeats, who tells Pound that A Boy's Wills is the best poetry written in America for a long time. He was also a friend of Rupert Brooke. Now, these collections, which were published in 1913 and 1914, they contain some of his best-known poems: Mending Wall, The Death of the Hired Man, Home Burial, After Apple Picking, and The Wood Pile. Now, after staying in England for about 4 years, he returned to the US in 1915 with his family. He bought a farm near Franconia, New Hampshire. Then he started teaching at Amherst College, and he continued to teach there for about 12 to 13 years. In 1924, he was awarded Pulitzer Prize for New Hampshire in May. He received honorary Lit D degrees from Middlebury College and Yale University. Now, he just accepted the lifetime appointment at University of Michigan as Fellow in Letters. Now, most of the themes of his poems are the themes related with nature and the various scenes. Now we find Frost to be a poet concentrating his attention on the rural aspect of his country, and at the same time he did make an effort to reveal or reflect the difference between the rural people or the rural scene and the urban scene. He was a poet who tried to pack his poems with different kinds of images. And these images were original in a sense that these images were not used by other poets. We can call Frost the new American genius. His images, woods, stars, houses, brooks, are usually taken from everyday life. With his own down-to-earth approach to his subjects, readers found it easy to follow the poet into deeper truths without being burdened with pedantry. Another effort on the part of this poet is that he tried to use a style which was rather conversational than being dogmatic. Now, behind the largely unruffled public facade was a personal life of great stress and sorrow. His daughters, Leslie and Irma, underwent unhappy marriages and painful divorces. Irma was at one point committed to a mental hospital, as Frost's sister had been some years earlier. In 1925, his daughter Marjorie was hospitalized in December, suffering from pneumonia, a pericardiac infection, chronic appendicitis, and nervous exhaustion. Marjorie, in many ways, the favorite of both her parents, died shortly after the birth of her first child in 1934, a loss from which neither Frost nor his wife ever fully recovered. In March 1938, after a long and often difficult marriage, Eleanor herself died of heart disease. In October 1940, Frost's son, Carroll, feeling himself a failure, despite Frost's strenuous efforts to convince him otherwise, committed suicide. His wife died in 1938, and he lost 4 of his children. 2 of his daughters suffered mental breakdowns, and his son Carroll, a frustrated poet and farmer, committed suicide. Frost also suffered from depression, and the continual self-doubt led him to cling to the desire to be awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. It is perhaps of these tragedies in life that he tried to divert his attention from his real life events and incidents to poetry writing. And his poems, they do contain the subjects and the expressions that are far from being poetic. It is as if a person is talking to another person. Now, we can say that the poems like Mending Wall or After Apple Picking, The Road Not Taken, Stopping by Woods. Now, when we read these poems, we find that he does try to acquaint us with his philosophy, the philosophy of humanitarianism, the philosophy of love, the philosophy of sympathy, the philosophy of understanding one another. Now, in Mending Wall, we find the opening line, something there is that doesn't love a wall. And he tries to focus his attention on nature as a great teacher. The force of nature tries to tell us, the human beings, many good things which we are not ready to pay attention to. Now, similarly, after apple picking, the description about the ice or the ice cubes, or we can say stopping by woods. In stopping by woods, we say woods. Whose woods are these? I think I know. Now, he concludes the poem by saying, woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So I think he was aware of his responsibility as the head of the family, as an American citizen. He knew that he has come to this mortal world to do something worthwhile. But because of these tragic incidents, we find that he was a bit shattered, frustrated, but yet he tried to conceal his sorrow by putting on the mask of a poet. We can say that here in him we find a poet who terrifies. None of these traumatic experiences found their way directly into Frost's poetry. At a far remove from the confessional tendencies of many later American poets, he did not see his art as a form of therapy. But these experiences and the sense of helplessness and self-recrimination that many of them bred inevitably worked to shape and color the views of life's possibilities and its limits that inform his work. To the broad public, Frost may be a painter of charming postcard scenes and a front porch philosopher dispensing consolation and cracker barrel wisdom. But behind these stereotypes, there is in Frost's work a tragic, and in Lionel Trilling's phrase, a terrifying poet whose deepest note is one of inevitable human isolation. In a life more painful than most, Frost struggled heroically with his inner and outer demons, and out of that struggle, he produced what many consider to be the single greatest body of work by any American poet of the 20th century, Life is a mixture of misery, melancholic experiences, but at the same time, it depends greatly on the onlooker. Which side do you focus your attention on? It has mirth also. And thinking about the brighter side is worth leading our life through. Now, he was, of course, a great poet, a poet who tried to lead us into a world of nature, full of beauty and grandeur. Now, the most important time, or you can say, the most important experience or the period was when he was called at the inauguration or presidential inauguration of John F. Kennedy. We can say that the capstone of his public career was his appearance at John F. Kennedy's presidential inauguration in January 1961. He wanted to read his new poem, The Preface, but because of the sun and the wind, he could not do it, but he recited his old poem, The Gift, outright from memory. Now, over the years, now it was indeed, of course, a great moment, a great occasion for him, his lifetime achievement, we can say. Over the years, he received a remarkable number of literary and academic honors. Among the honors and rewards Frost received were tributes from the U.S. Senate in 1950, the American Academy of Poets in 1953, New York University 1956, and the Huntington Hartford Foundation 1958, the Congressional Gold Medal in 1962, the Edward McDowell Medal in 1962. In 1930, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Letters, Amherst College, appointed him Simpson Lecturer for life, and in 1958, he was made Poetry Consultant for the Library of Congress. Kennedy also sent him to the Soviet Union as a sort of cultural envoy in 1962, not long before his death in a Boston hospital on January 29, 1963, 8 weeks short of his 89th birthday. At the time of his death, Frost was regarded as a kind of unofficial poet laureate of the United States. His legacy, we can say, I would have written of me on my stone, I had a lover's quarrel with the world, he once said. His independent, elusive, half-humorous view of the world produced such remarks as, I never take my side in a quarrel, or I am never serious except when I am fooling. Now, later biographers have created a complex and contradictory portrait of the poet. In Lawrence Thompson's humorless 3-volume official biography, Frost was presented as a misanthrope, anti-intellectual, cruel and angry man, but in J. Parini's work, he was again viewed with sympathy. He was a loner who liked company, a poet of isolation who sought a mass audience, a rebel who sought to fit in. Although a family man to the core, he frequently felt alienated from his wife and children and withdrew into reveries. While preferring to stay at home, he traveled more than any poet of his generation to give lectures and readings, even though he remained terrified of public speaking to the end. Here are some pictures of Frost attending the presidential inauguration. Now, though he has written about nature, we cannot call him a nature poet because he has written many poems which are set in rural or pastoral surroundings. He said that he had only written one poem without a man in it. Nature for Frost was an arena for action. Now, let us look at the aspects of his poetry. He has used contraries and contradictions. He has used common everyday speech, poems set in nature, and deep meanings exist beneath a simple exterior. We can call him a modern poet because he uses ordinary speech within formal patterns of line and stanza, uses traditional forms and structures while exploring modern themes of alienation and isolation. Frost believed that the poet's response to modern life was to revert back to traditional forms which provided a sense of order. Now, the various motives in his poetry, we can say the cycle of the seasons, the alternation of night and day, perhaps it is because of the dark side and the brighter side, natural phenomena, rural images. So we can say that Frost was a poet who was interested in man and manners. The various pictures or the various experiences presented by life. A literary critic, Lionel Trinning, called him a poet who terrifies. But in his poems, there exists a lofty undertone, or you can say a subtle undertone of fear or uneasiness, a hinting at something dark or dangerous. This juxtaposition or blending of the calm, often rural, peaceful surface with an underlying darkness is not uncommon in Frost's poetry. He uses these contraries or opposites often in his poetry. Now, all this just proves that he was a great poet. He was not only a great poet, but a man, a great human being, who tried to face all the tragedies in his life with great courage. And he tried to teach us, his readers, how a person should confront life, how a person should bear or tolerate whatever happens in life. No doubt he was a great poet and a great human being.